A $3 bottle of hydrogen peroxide sitting on a shelf at Walgreens has its own TikTok career at this point. Headlight restorer, rust killer, stain eraser, fuel booster. If you search hydrogen peroxide car hack right now, you'll get about 2 million results, and roughly half of them will tell you to do something that will physically damage your vehicle. I wanted to know which of those claims survive contact with actual chemistry, so I went through the most repeated ones, checked what hydrogen peroxide actually is, and what it does when it touches the materials on your car, and I found something that surprised me. 4 of these claims are real. They work, they're cheap, and a mechanic would rather sell you a $60 detail than tell you about them. But one of the most popular claims on this entire list cannot work. Not doesn't work well, cannot. The chemistry points in the opposite direction from what every blog post says it does, and we'll get to that one at the very end. My name's Walt Renner. I got burned paying top dollar for a 5-star ceramic coating that didn't survive 3 weeks. That's when I stopped trusting the bottle and started digging into who'd actually tested the stuff. No free products from any of these companies. No ads. Just the data I could find and what it actually says. That pattern, someone handing you a shortcut without checking whether the chemistry actually supports it, isn't just a hydrogen peroxide problem. It shows up on every product you'll touch on this car, and most of the ones in your house. I want to mention something once, and then I won't bring it up again. A video can show you where that trick hides on one product. It can't hold the full directory of every free database and standards body that publishes real test data, or the search steps to pull it yourself, or the decoder for every mark and seal on a box, including which ones the company issued to itself. I started keeping notes on how to catch that trick before it catches you. Those notes are finished. It's called the bench test. $49 at waltrenner.com. I won't mention it again. If it interests you, it's there. Everything I'm about to show you in this video works without it. Here's what you need to understand before any of this list makes sense. The stuff in that brown bottle is water with 1 extra oxygen atom bolted on. That extra atom is unstable, and it wants to leave. When it does, it becomes one of 2 things depending on what it lands on. On organic matter, blood, mold, plant-based stains, it's a bleaching agent. It rips apart the color molecules and kills living cells. On bare metal, it's an oxidizer. It accelerates the exact chemical reaction that creates rust. Same bottle. 2 completely opposite outcomes depending on the surface. Every claim on this list either works because of that first reaction or fails because of the second one, and nobody making the TikTok ever mentions which one they're triggering. Number 11. A 1:2 dilution of 3% hydrogen peroxide and water in a spray bottle cleans vinyl dashboards, plastic door panels, and center consoles. Spray it on, wait 30 seconds, wipe it off with a microfiber cloth. The peroxide breaks down the organic gunk, your skin oils, food residue, whatever your kids wiped on the door handle, and it evaporates clean. It leaves nothing behind, no residue and no film. Detail DIY tested it across multiple interior surfaces and confirmed it's safe on plastic and vinyl at that dilution. The one surface to skip in here is leather. We'll get to why. That's your freebie. Now the ones worth spending time on. Number 10. If you've ever left windows cracked during a rainstorm or bought a used car that smells like a wet basement, hydrogen peroxide at 3% kills mold spores on cloth and carpet without producing the toxic fumes bleach does. Spray it on, let it sit 10 minutes, blot it up. The oxygen release physically disrupts the cell walls of the mold. Bust Mold's 2026 guide rated it the best household option for porous surfaces, which is exactly what your car's carpet and headliner are. Bleach can't penetrate those same porous fibers. It kills what's on the surface and leaves the roots alive underneath. But you still have to fix the moisture source, or the mold comes right back. Peroxide kills spores. It doesn't seal your weather stripping, and if the mold has already gotten into the foam padding underneath the carpet, you're past what any spray bottle can reach. At that point, you're pulling carpet, and that's a shop job. The peroxide handles what's on the surface and inside the top layer of the fabric. It's genuinely good at that. Just don't confuse surface mold with a moisture problem that's been running for months. Number 9. Same chemistry as the mold. If the stain is plant-based or protein-based, coffee, grape juice, food grease, the peroxide oxidizes the color compounds and breaks them apart. Dilute it 1 to 2 with water. Spray the stain, let it sit 10 to 15 minutes. Then blot with a clean microfiber cloth. Torque Details testing confirmed it oxidizes these colored stains effectively on fabric. OxyClean, the powdered stain remover people already trust, is literally sodium percarbonate, which releases hydrogen peroxide when it dissolves. Same active ingredient, different packaging. About 10 times the price per use. One warning though, undiluted, it will lighten the dye in your fabric. Always dilute, and always test a spot under the seat first. That was 3 wins in a row. 4 of the 11 items on this list actually work, and you've heard 3. The 4th one comes later, and it only half works, which makes it more interesting than the ones that fully do. But before we get there, number 8 is where the list turns, and it turns hard. Number 8. Blood stain removal. This is the one hydrogen peroxide was basically made for, and it's worth understanding why, because the mechanism is what separates it from every other cleaning hack on this list. Blood contains an enzyme called catalase. The moment peroxide touches catalase, it decomposes violently into water and oxygen gas. That's the fizzing you see. That fizz isn't decorative. It's physically lifting the hemoglobin out of the fabric fibers from underneath, pushing the stain up and off the surface, instead of you scrubbing it deeper in. Autopump's guide on blood removal confirmed that 3% pharmacy-grade peroxide breaks down blood on cloth and vinyl on contact. Pour a small amount on a white cloth, dab it onto the stain, let it bubble for 2 to 3 minutes, blot it away. Cold water only. Hot water denatures the blood proteins and locks the stain in permanently. Here's the part that matters for your wallet. A professional interior detail that includes biostain removal runs $60 to $120 at most shops. A bottle of hydrogen peroxide that does the same job on blood costs $1.80. That was the chemistry working in your favor. And I want to be fair about something before we keep going. Hydrogen peroxide is not a bad product. It's a useful product that people are aiming at the wrong surfaces. The 4 wins you just heard are real, and the $1.80 bottle in your bathroom cabinet genuinely outperforms products that cost 20 times more on those specific jobs. The problem starts when someone assumes that because it worked on cloth, it'll work on metal, or paint, or leather. That's not a peroxide problem. That's an advice problem. And every item from here forward is the chemistry working against you, because nobody making the content bothered to check which side they were on. Number 7. Headlight restoration. This is the most shared hydrogen peroxide car hack on the internet, and it's half true. Headlight lenses are polycarbonate plastic. Over years of UV exposure, the top layer oxidizes and turns yellow. Hydrogen peroxide, as an oxidizer itself, can break down part of that degraded layer and temporarily improve clarity. A Bob is the Oil Guy forum thread documented one owner using salon-grade peroxide cream, applying it in direct sunlight, and getting noticeable results after 3 to 4 applications. But here's what they didn't mention. Polycarbonate headlights come from the factory with a UV-resistant hard coat. That coat is what yellowed. It's the same idea as the clear coat on your paint, a sacrificial barrier between the UV radiation and the material underneath. Peroxide attacks the yellowed layer, but it doesn't stop there. It also attacks whatever's left of that protective barrier underneath, because it can't tell the difference. The degraded layer and the intact layer are both organic material, and peroxide treats them the same way. So you get a clearer lens for a few weeks. And then the unprotected polycarbonate oxidizes faster than it did before you touched it. A proper headlight restoration uses wet sanding to remove the damaged layer, then a UV-resistant clear coat to replace what was lost. That's a $20 kit and 30 minutes of work. The peroxide method costs $3 and buys you about 3 weeks before the lens hazes over worse than where you started. That's the item where it worked and it was a good idea quietly stop being the same thing. Number 6. Tree sap removal. This one circulates constantly, and it fails for a reason that has nothing to do with the peroxide being too weak. Tree sap is a mixture of resins and terpenes that cross-link into a rigid polymer matrix once they cure in the sun. That's a non-polar, resin-bonded coating. Hydrogen peroxide is a water-based polar molecule. It can't dissolve resin bonds any more than water can dissolve candle wax. The reason people believe it works is that fresh sap, before it cures, is still partially water-soluble, and almost anything wet will help you wipe it off at that stage. But by the time you're searching for a hack, the sap has been baking on the hood for a week, and it's already polymerized. Chemical Guy's own sap removal guide doesn't mention peroxide once. They recommend a clay bar or isopropyl alcohol, because those actually interact with the resin structure. The peroxide just sits on top, does nothing, and evaporates. Number 5. This one is paint scratch removal, and there's nothing ambiguous about it. Scratches are physical gouges in the clear coat. Removing them requires an abrasive compound that levels the surrounding surface down to the depth of the scratch, or a filler that occupies the gouge optically. Hydrogen peroxide is a liquid. It is not abrasive. It contains no filling agent. It can't mechanically alter the surface of automotive clear coat. Cars Bibles tested it and confirmed it has no effect on scratches. If a blog told you to rub hydrogen peroxide on paint scratches, that blog has never held a polisher. Number 4. Applying it undiluted to painted surfaces. Detail DIY confirmed that hydrogen peroxide won't damage clear coat directly, but it will strip wax, paint sealant, and ceramic coatings on contact. Those are the layers between your paint and the UV radiation, bird droppings, and acid rain that destroy it. Spraying undiluted peroxide on your paint to clean it removes the one barrier you paid to put there. And most people don't reapply sealant after they're done, because nobody told them they'd need to. You've traded a clean-looking panel for an unprotected one. If you paid for a ceramic coating, that's a $200 to $400 layer gone. If you used a basic carnauba wax, it's $20 and an afternoon of your time gone. Either way, you just did more damage than the bird droppings you were trying to clean off. Pay attention to these last 3. One will ruin a surface you can't easily replace. One can disable your car entirely. And one is repeated on thousands of websites by people who apparently never opened a chemistry textbook. Watch for which one it is. Number 3. This one is about leather interior cleaning, and it's simpler than it sounds. Automotive leather is treated with a thin urethane protective coating and conditioned with oils to stay supple. Hydrogen peroxide strips moisture from both of those layers. On leather, it pulls the oils out of the hide, breaks down the urethane topcoat, and leaves the surface dry and brittle. Cars Bibles flagged this one directly, and they weren't hedging. Avoid using hydrogen peroxide on leather surfaces because it dries out and damages the material. That's a material incompatibility, not a matter of concentration or technique. The ugly part is that the damage shows up slowly. You clean the seat, it looks great for a week. You might even do it again the next month, because it seemed to work so well. And 3 months later, the leather starts cracking along the bolster where your hip sits, because that's where the most friction happens, and where the most oil was stripped. The stitching starts pulling because the hide around it shrank. You'll blame the sun, or the age of the car, or the leather quality. But what happened is that every time you sprayed that seat, you pulled more moisture out of a material that needs moisture to stay flexible. The peroxide accelerated a process that should have taken years, and it did it in a few months. A pH-neutral leather cleaner and a conditioner cost $12 combined. The peroxide isn't cheaper if it costs you a seat retrim. Number 2. Here's the part that should bother you. There are actual forums where people discuss putting hydrogen peroxide in their gas tank to boost combustion or clean injectors. The logic sounds almost reasonable on the surface. Peroxide releases oxygen. Combustion needs oxygen. More oxygen means more power. But peroxide is a polar compound. Gasoline is nonpolar. They don't mix. The peroxide sinks to the bottom of the tank and sits there, corroding every metal and rubber component it touches. Fuel lines, injector seals, the tank lining itself. SAT Japan's analysis of peroxide in fuel scenarios confirmed it can corrode metal, degrade rubber and plastic fuel system components, and in high enough concentrations, create a genuine ignition risk. Peroxide decomposes into water and oxygen, and if that decomposition happens rapidly inside a confined, fuel vapor-filled space, you're looking at the conditions for a fire. No concentration of hydrogen peroxide is safe in a fuel system. There is no, just a little bit, version of this. And if you're wondering whether anybody has actually tried it, yes. There are forum posts from people who put a capful in, drove the car for a week, and then couldn't figure out why the check engine light came on and their fuel pressure started dropping. By the time a mechanic traced it to corroded injector seals, the repair bill was north of $800. A capful. Fuel system additives exist for injector cleaning, and they're engineered to be compatible with gasoline chemistry. Hydrogen peroxide is not one of them. That was dangerous. This last one is worse in a different way, because it sounds so reasonable that millions of people believe it. Number 1. Use hydrogen peroxide to remove rust from your car. You'll find it on cleaning blogs, Pinterest boards, hack compilations, and AI-generated articles that have never been within 50 feet of a fender. And it cannot work. Not doesn't work well. Cannot. Because rust is iron oxide. It's the product of iron reacting with oxygen. And hydrogen peroxide is an oxidizer. It donates oxygen. You are applying more of the thing that caused the problem to the problem itself. When hydrogen peroxide contacts bare iron or steel, something called a Fenton reaction occurs. The iron ions in the rust catalyze the peroxide into hydroxyl radicals, and those radicals are among the most aggressive oxidizing agents that exist in chemistry. They attack the metal surface faster than atmospheric exposure ever could. Biology Insights documented this process directly. The iron acts as a catalyst, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of rapid metal loss. You're not cleaning the rust, you're feeding it. Instructables has an entire tutorial on using hydrogen peroxide, vinegar, and salt to deliberately rust metal for art projects. That's how effective it is at creating corrosion, not removing it. So why does this myth survive? Because the fizzing looks like cleaning. Peroxide hits rust, it bubbles, loose flakes come off, the surface looks different. But what you're seeing is the peroxide decomposing on contact with the iron ions, not dissolving the rust. The metal underneath is now more corroded than it was before you started. If you want actual rust treatment, phosphoric acid converts iron oxide into iron phosphate, a stable compound you can paint over. That's what Naval Jelly and Osfo are. They cost $8, and they work with the chemistry instead of against it. And that's the whole problem with the hydrogen peroxide car advice ecosystem. The people sharing these tips are watching the fizz and calling it cleaning. They're not checking what the surface looks like a week later, and they have no idea that the bottle in their hand is an oxidizer, not a cleaner. The blogs copy each other. The AI-generated articles copy the blogs. The TikToks copy the articles. And at no point in that chain did anyone spray it on a rusty bracket, leave it for 3 days and come back to see what actually happened. Because if they had, they'd have found more rust, not less. That's what happens when advice gets shared based on how it looks in a 15-second clip, instead of what it does to the metal over time. So here's what you carry with you past this video, and it applies to every home remedy anybody hands you for anything on your car, not just the ones on this list. 2 questions. The first one, is the surface organic or metallic? If it's cloth, carpet, plastic, or a biological stain, hydrogen peroxide probably works, because it's attacking organic compounds. If it's bare metal, painted metal, or leather, it's attacking the surface itself. Same bottle, opposite outcomes depending on what you spray it on. The second one, Does the person giving you the advice know what hydrogen peroxide actually is? Because if they call it a cleaner and leave it at that, they've skipped the only part that matters. It's an oxidizer. It gives oxygen away, and whether that helps you or hurts you depends entirely on what it's oxidizing. 4 of these will save you real money. The rest will end up costing you more than the mechanic would have charged in the first place. Next time, I'm pulling apart the 5 tire brands that don't make their own tires, and you're going to recognize at least one of them sitting in your garage right now.